Section 1 of The Empire of Business by Andrew Carnegie, first published in 1902. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Empire of Business, Section Number 1. The Road to Business Success, a Talk to Young Men. It is well that young men should begin at the beginning and occupy the most subordinate positions. Many of the leading businessmen of Pittsburgh had a serious responsibility thrust upon them at the very threshold of their career. They were introduced to the broom, and spent the first hours of their business lives sweeping out the office. I notice we have janitors and janitresses now in offices, and our young men unfortunately miss that salutary branch of a business education. But if by chance the professional sweeper is absent any morning, the boy who has the genius of the future partner in him will not hesitate to try his hand at the broom. The other day a fond, fashionable mother in Michigan asked a young man whether he had ever seen a young lady sweep in a room so grandly as her Priscilla. He said no, he never had, and the mother was gratified beyond measure. "But then," said he, after a pause, "what I should like to see her do is sweep out a room. It does not hurt the newest comer to sweep out the office if necessary. I was one of those sweepers myself, and who do you suppose were my fellow sweepers? David McCargo, now superintendent of the Allegheny Valley Railroad, Robert Pitcairn, superintendent of the Pennsylvania Railroad, and Mr. Moreland, city attorney. We all took turns, 2 each morning did the sweeping, and now I remember Davy was so proud of his clean white shirt bosom that he used to spread it over an old silk bandana handkerchief which he kept for the purpose, and we other boys thought he was putting on airs. So he was. None of us had a silk handkerchief. Assuming that you have all obtained employment and are fairly started, my advice to you is aim high. I would not give a fig for the young man who does not already see himself the partner or the head of an important firm. Do not rest content for a moment in your thoughts as head clerk or foreman or general manager in any concern, no matter how extensive. Say each to yourself, my place is at the top. Be king in your dreams. Make your vow that you will reach that position with untarnished reputation, and make no other vow to distract your attention, except the very commendable one that, when you are a member of the firm, or before that, if you have been promoted 2 or 3 times, you will form another partnership with the loveliest of her sex, a partnership to which our new Partnership Act has no application. The liability there is never limited. Let me indicate 2 or 3 conditions essential to success. Do not be afraid that I am going to moralize or inflict a homily upon you. I speak upon the subject only from the view of a man of the world, desirous of aiding you to become successful businessmen. You all know that there is no genuine, praiseworthy success in life if you are not honest, truthful, fair-dealing. I assume you are, and will remain all these, and also that you are determined to live pure, respectable lives, free from pernicious or equivocal associations with one sex or the other. There is no creditable future for you else. Otherwise your learning and your advantages not only go for naught, but serve to accentuate your failure and your disgrace. I hope you will not take it amiss if I warn you against 3 of the gravest dangers which will beset you in your upward path. The first and most seductive, and the destroyer of most young men, is the drinking of liquor. I am no temperance lecturer in disguise, but a man who knows and tells you what observation has proved to him. And I say to you that you are more likely to fail in your career from acquiring the habit of drinking liquor than any other or all the other temptations likely to assail you. You may yield to almost any other temptation and reform, may brace up and, if not recover lost ground, at least remain in the race, and secure and maintain a respectable position. But from the insane thirst for liquor escape is almost impossible. I have known but few exceptions to this rule. First, then, you must not drink liquor to excess. Better if you do not touch it at all. Much better. But if this be too hard a rule for you, then take your stand firmly here. Resolve never to touch it except at meals. A glass at dinner will not hinder your advance in life or lower your tone, but I implore you hold it inconsistent with the dignity and self-respect of gentlemen, with what is due from yourselves to yourselves, being the men you are, and especially the men you are determined to become, to drink a glass of liquor at a bar. Be far too much of the gentleman ever to enter a bar-room. You do not pursue your careers in safety unless you stand firmly upon this ground. Adhere to it, and you have escaped danger from the deadliest of your foes. The next greatest danger to a young business man in this community I believe to be that of speculation. When I was a telegraph operator here we had no exchanges in the city, but the men or firms who speculated upon the Eastern exchanges were necessarily known to the operators. They could be counted on the fingers of one hand. These men were not our citizens of first repute. They were regarded with suspicion. I have lived to see all of these speculators irreparably ruined men, bankrupt in money and bankrupt in character. There is scarcely an instance of a man who has made a fortune by speculation and kept it. Gamesters die poor, and there is certainly not an instance of a speculator who has lived a life creditable to himself or advantageous to the community. The man who grasps the morning paper to see first how his speculative ventures upon the exchanges are likely to result, unfits himself for the calm consideration and proper solution of business problems with which he has to deal later in the day, and saps the sources of that persistent and concentrated energy upon which depend the permanent success and often the very safety of his main business. The speculator and the business man tread diverging lines. The former depends upon the sudden turn of fortune's wheel. He is a millionaire today, a bankrupt tomorrow. But the man of business knows that only by years of patient, unremitting attention to affairs can he earn his reward, which is the result not of chance but of well-devised means for the attainment of ends. During all these years his is the cheering thought by no possibility can he benefit himself without carrying prosperity to others. The speculator, on the other hand, had better never have lived so far as the good of others or the good of the community is concerned. Hundreds of young men were tempted in this city not long since to gamble in oil, and many were ruined. All were injured, whether they lost or won. You may be, nay, you are certain to be similarly tempted. But when so tempted, I hope you will remember this advice. Say to the tempter who asks you to risk your small savings that if ever you decide to speculate, you are determined to go to a regular and well-conducted house where they cheat fair. You can get fair play and about an equal chance upon the red and black in such a place. Upon the exchange you have neither. You might as well try your luck with a 3-card Monte man. There's another point involved in speculation. Nothing is more essential to young businessmen than untarnished credit begotten of confidence in their prudence, principles, and stability of character. Well, believe me, nothing kills credit sooner in any bank board than the knowledge that either firms or men engage in speculation. It matters not a whit whether gains or losses be the temporary result of these operations. The moment a man is known to speculate, his credit is impaired, and soon thereafter it is gone. How can a man be credited whose resources may be swept away in 1 hour by a panic among gamesters? Who can tell how he stands among them, except that this is certain: he has given due notice that he may stand to lose all, so that those who credit him have themselves to blame. Resolve to be business men, but speculators never. The third and last danger against which I shall warn you is one which has wrecked many a fair craft which started well and gave promise of a prosperous voyage. It is the perilous habit of endorsing, all the more dangerous inasmuch as it assails one generally in the garb of friendship. It appeals to your generous instincts, and you say, "How can I refuse to lend my name only to assist a friend?" It is because there is so much that is true and commendable in that view that the practice is so dangerous. Let me endeavor to put you upon safe, honorable grounds in regard to it. I would say to you to make it a rule now, never endorse, but this is too much like never taste wine, or never smoke, or any other of the nevers. They generally result in exceptions. You will, as businessmen now and then, probably become security for friends. Now here is the line at which regard for the success of friends should cease and regard for your own honor begin. If you owe anything, all your capital and all your effects are a solemn trust in your hands to be held inviolate for the security of those who have trusted you. Nothing can be done by you with honor which jeopardizes these first claims upon you. When a man in debt endorses for another, it is not his own credit or his own capital he risks, it is that of his own creditors. He violates a trust. Mark you then, never endorse until you have cash means not required for your own debts, and never endorse beyond those means. Before you endorse at all, consider endorsements as gifts, and ask yourselves whether you wish to make the gift to your friend, and whether the money is really yours to give, and not a trust for your creditors. You are not safe, gentlemen, unless you stand firmly upon this as the only ground which an honest business man can occupy. I beseech you, avoid liquor, speculation, and endorsement. Do not fail in either, for liquor and speculation are the Scylla and Charybdis of the young man's business sea, and endorsement is rock ahead. Assuming you are safe in regard to these your gravest dangers, the question now is how to rise from the subordinate position you have imagined you in, through the successive grades, to the position for which you are, in my opinion, and I trust in your own, evidently intended. I can give you the secret. It lies mainly in this. Instead of the question, "What must I do for my employer?" substitute, "What can I do?" Faithful and conscientious discharge of the duties assigned you is all very well, but the verdict in such cases generally is that you perform your present duties so well that you had better continue performing them. Now, young gentlemen, this will not do. It will not do for the coming partners. There must be something beyond this. We make clerks, bookkeepers, treasurers, bank tellers of this class, and there they remain to the end of the chapter. The rising man must do something exceptional, and beyond the range of his special department. He must attract attention. A shipping clerk, he may do so by discovering in an invoice an error with which he has nothing to do, and which has escaped the attention of the proper party. If a weighing clerk, he may save the firm by doubting the adjustment of the scales and having them corrected, even if this be the province of the master mechanic. If a messenger boy, even he can lay the seed of promotion by going beyond the letter of his instructions in order to secure the desired reply. There is no service so low and simple, neither any so high, in which the young man of ability and willing disposition cannot readily and almost daily prove himself capable of greater trust and usefulness, and, what is equally important, show his invincible determination to rise. Some day in your own department you will be directed to do or say something which you know will prove disadvantage to the interest of the firm. Here is your chance. Stand up like a man and say so. Say it boldly and give your reasons, and thus prove to your employer that, while his thoughts have been engaged upon other matters, you have been studying during hours when perhaps he thought you asleep, how to advance his interests. You may be right or you may be wrong, but in either case you have gained the first condition of success. You have attracted attention. Your employer has found that he is not a mere hireling in his service, but a man, not one who is content to give so many hours of work for so many dollars in return, but one who devotes his spare hours and constant thoughts to the business. Such an employee must perforce be thought of, and thought of kindly and well. It will not be long before his advice is asked in his special branch, and if the advice given be sound, it will soon be asked and taken upon questions of broader bearing. This means partnership, if not with present employers, then with others. Your foot in such case is upon the ladder. The amount of climbing done depends entirely upon yourself. One false axiom you will often hear, which I wish to guard you against: obey orders if you break owners. Don't you do it. There is no rule for you to follow. Always break orders to save owners. There never was a great character who did not sometimes smash the routine regulations and make new ones for himself. The rule is only suitable for such as have no aspirations, and you have not forgotten that you are destined to be owners, and to make orders and break orders. Do not hesitate to do it whenever you are sure the interests of your employer will be thereby promoted, and when you are so sure of the result that you are willing to take the responsibility. You will never be a partner unless you know the business of your department far better than the owners possibly can. When called to account for your independent action, show him the result of your genius, and tell him that you knew that it would be so. Show him how mistaken the orders were. Boss your boss, just as soon as you can. Try it on early. There is nothing he will like so well if he is the right kind of boss. If he is not the man for you to remain with. Leave him whenever you can, even at a present sacrifice, and find one capable of discerning genius. Our young partners in the Carnegie firm have won their spurs by showing that we did not know half as well what was wanted as they did. Some of them have acted upon occasion with me as if they owned the firm, and I was but some erring New Yorker presuming to advise upon what I knew very little about. Well, they are not interfered with much now. They were the true bosses, the very men we were looking for. There is one sure mark of the coming partner, the future millionaire. His revenues always exceed his expenditures. He begins to save early, almost as soon as he begins to earn. No matter how little it may be possible to save that little. Invest it securely, not necessarily in bonds, but in anything which you have good reason to believe will be profitable. But no gambling with it, remember. A rare chance will soon present itself for investment. The little you have saved will prove the basis for an amount of credit utterly surprising to you. Capitalists trust the saving young man. For every $100 you can produce as the result of hard-won savings, Midas, in search of a partner, will lend or credit 1,000. For every 1,000, 50,000. It is not capital that your seniors require. It is the man who has proved that he has the business habits which create capital, and to create it in the best of all possible ways, as far as self-discipline is concerned, is by adjusting his habits to his means. Gentlemen, it is the first $100 saved which tells. Begin at once to lay up something. The bee predominates in the future millionaire. Of course, there are better, higher aims than saving. As an end, the acquisition of wealth is ignoble in the extreme. I assume that you save and long for wealth only as a means of enabling you the better to do something good in your day and generation. Make a note of this essential rule. Expenditure always within income. You may grow impatient or become discouraged when year by year you float on in subordinate positions. There is no doubt that it is becoming harder and harder as business gravitates more and more to immense concerns for a young man without capital to get a start for himself. And in this city especially, where large capital is essential, it is unusually difficult. Still, let me tell you for your encouragement that there is no country in the world where able and energetic young men can so readily rise as this, nor any city where there is more room at the top. It has been impossible to meet the demand for capable first-class bookkeepers. Mark the adjectives. The supply has never been equal to the demand. Young men give all kinds of reasons why in their cases failure was clearly attributable to exceptional circumstances which render success impossible. Some never had a chance, according to their own story. This is simply nonsense. No young man ever lived who had not had a chance, and a splendid chance, too, if he ever was employed at all. He is essayed in the mind of his immediate superior from the day he begins work, and after a time, if he has merits, he is essayed in the council chamber of the firm. His ability, honesty, habits, associations, temper, disposition, all these are weighed and analyzed. The young man who never had a chance is the same young man who has been canvassed over and over again by his superiors, and found destitute of necessary qualifications, or is deemed unworthy of closer relations with the firm, owing to some objectionable act, habit, or association, of which he thought his employers ignorant. Another class of young men attribute their failure to employers having relations or favorites whom they advance unfairly. They also insist that their employers dislike brighter intelligences than their own, and are disposed to discourage aspiring genius, and delight in keeping young men down. There is nothing in this. On the contrary, there is no one suffering so much for lack of the right man in the right place, nor so anxious to find him, as the owner. There is not a firm in Pittsburgh today which is not in the constant search for business ability, and every one of them will tell you that there is no article in the market at all times so scarce. There is always a boom in brains. Cultivate that crop, for if you grow any amount of that commodity, here is your best market, and you cannot overstock it. And the more brains you have to sell, the higher price you can exact. They are not quite so sure a crop as wild oats, which never fail to produce a bountiful harvest, but they have the advantage over these in always finding a market. Do not hesitate to engage in any legitimate business, for there is no business in America, I do not care what, which will not yield a fair profit if it receive the unremitting, exclusive attention and all the capital of capable and industrious men. Every business will have its season of depression. Years always come during which the manufacturers and merchants of the city are severely tried, years when mills must be run, not for profit, but at a loss, that the organization and men may be kept together and employed, and the concern may keep its products in the market. But on the other hand, every legitimate business producing or dealing in an article which man requires is bound in time to be fairly profitable, if properly conducted. And here is the prime condition of success, the great secret. Concentrate your energy, thought, and capital exclusively upon the business in which you are engaged. Having begun in one line, resolve to fight it out on that line, to lead in it, adopt every improvement, have the best machinery, and know the most about it. The concerns which fail are those which have scattered their capital, which means that they have scattered their brains also. They have investments in this or that or the other, here, there, and everywhere. Don't put all your eggs in one basket is all wrong. I tell you, put all your eggs in one basket, and then watch that basket. Look round you and take notice. Men who do that do not often fail. It is easy to watch and carry the one basket. It is trying to carry too many baskets that one breaks most eggs in this country. He who carries 3 baskets must put one on his head, which is apt to tumble and trip him up. One fault of the American business man is lack of concentration. To summarize what I have said, aim for the highest. Never enter a bar-room. Do not touch liquor, or if at all, only at meals. Never speculate. Never endorse beyond your surplus cash fund. Make the firm's interest yours. Break orders always to save owners. Concentrate. Put all your eggs in one basket, and watch that basket. Expenditure always within revenue. Lastly, be not impatient, for as Emerson says, no one can cheat you out of ultimate success but yourselves. I congratulate poor young men upon being born to that ancient and honorable degree which renders it necessary that they should devote themselves to hard work. A basketful of bonds is the heaviest basket a young man ever had to carry. He generally gets to staggering under it. We have in this city creditable instances of such young men, who have pressed to the front rank of our best and most useful citizens. They deserve great credit. But the vast majority of the sons of rich men are unable to resist the temptations to which wealth subjects them, and sink to unworthy lives. I would almost as soon leave a young man a curse as burden him with the almighty dollar. It is not from this class you have rivalry to fear. The partners' sons will not trouble you much, but look out that some boys poorer, much poorer than yourselves, whose parents cannot afford to give them the advantages of a course in this institute, advantages which should give you a decided lead in the race. Look out that such boys do not challenge you at the post and pass you at the grandstand. Look out for the boy who has to plunge into work direct from the common school, and who begins by sweeping out the office. He is the probable dark horse that you had better watch. End of section number 1. A Talk to Young Men.
Section 2 of The Empire of Business by Andrew Carnegie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Michelle Fry, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in August 2020. The Empire of Business, Section 2. The Common Interest of Labor and Capital. Address to Working Men. A great philosopher has pointed out to us that in this life, the highest reward that we can obtain is the purchase of satisfactions. I have purchased a great satisfaction, one of the greatest I have ever acquired. I have been privileged to help some of my fellow workmen help themselves. This library, Braddock, Pennsylvania, will give them an opportunity to make themselves more valuable to their employers and so lay up intellectual capital that cannot be impaired or depreciated. It is very unfortunate that the irresistible tendency of our age, which draws manufacturing into immense establishments, requiring the work of thousands of men, renders it impossible for employers who reside near to obtain that intimate acquaintance with employees which under the old system of manufacturing in very small establishments made the relation of master and man more pleasing to both. When articles were manufactured in small shops by employers who required only the assistance of a few men and apprentices, the employer had opportunities to know everyone, to become well acquainted with each, and to know his merits both as a man and as a workman, and on the other hand, the workman, being brought into closer contact with his employer, inevitably knew more of his business, of his cares and troubles, of his efforts to succeed, and, more important than all, they came to know something of the characteristics of the man himself. All this is changed. Thus, the employees become more like human machines, as it were, to the employer, and the employer becomes almost a myth to his men. From every point of view, this is a most regrettable result, yet it is one for which I see no remedy. The free play of economic laws is forcing the manufacture of all articles of general consumption more and more into the hands of a few enormous concerns, that their cost to the consumer may be less. There is no longer any room for conducting the manufacture of such articles upon a small scale. Expensive works and machinery costing millions are required, as the amount per ton or per yard of what we call fixed charges is so great a factor in the total cost that whether a concern can run successfully or not in many cases depends on whether it divides these fixed charges, which may be said to be practically the same in a large establishment as in a smaller, by 1,000 tons per day or by 500 tons per day of product. Hence, the reason for the continual increase year by year in the product of your mills, not that the manufacturer wishes primarily to increase his product, but that the strain of competition forces him into extensions that he may thereby reduce more and more per ton or per yard these fixed charges upon which the safety of his capital depends. It being therefore impossible for the employers of thousands to become acquainted with their men, if we are not to lose all feeling of mutuality between us, the employer must seek their acquaintance through other forms, to express his care for the well-being of those upon whose labor he depends for success, by devoting part of his earnings for institutions like this library, and for the accommodation of organizations, such as the cooperative stores which occupy the lower floor of this building, and I hope in return that the employees are to show by the use which they make of such benefactions that they in turn respond to this sentiment upon the part of employers wherever it may be found. By such means as these, we may hope to maintain to some extent the old feeling of kindliness, mutual confidence, respect, and esteem, which formerly distinguished the relations between the employer and his men. We are younger than Europe, and have still something to see from the older land in this respect, But I rejoice to see that many manufacturers in this country are awaking to the sense of duty to their employees, and what is even still more important are the evidences which we find among our workmen of a desire to establish societies which cannot but be beneficial to themselves. It is all well enough for people to help others, but the grandest result is achieved when people prove able to help themselves. Another important feature which may be referred to is that in Pittsburgh, labor generally is paid so well that the workman can save something every month if only he will make the effort. Nothing can exceed the importance of saving part of his earnings. The workman who owns his own home has already a sure foundation upon which to build the competence which is to give him comfort and independence in old age. I have said how desirable it was that we should endeavor, by every means in our power, to bring about a feeling of mutuality and partnership between the employer and the employed. Believe me, the interests of capital and labor are one. He is an enemy of labor who seeks to array labor against capital. He is the enemy of capital who seeks to array capital against labor. I have given the subject of labor and capital careful study for years, and I wish to quote a few paragraphs from an article I published years ago. Quote, "The greatest cause of the friction which prevails between capital and labor, the real essence of the trouble, and the remedy I have to propose for this unfortunate friction. The trouble is that men are not paid at any time the compensation proper to that time. All large concerns necessarily keep filled with orders, say for 6 months in advance, and these orders are taken, of course, at prices prevailing when they are booked. This year's operations furnish perhaps the best illustration of the difficulty. Steel rails at the end of last year for delivery this year were $29 per ton at the works. Of course, the mills entered orders freely at this price, and kept on entering them until the demand, growing unexpectedly great, carried prices up to $35 per ton. Now the various mills in America are compelled for the next 6 months or more to run upon orders which do not average $31 per ton at the seaboard and Pittsburgh, and say $34 at Chicago. Transportation, ironstone, and prices of all kinds have advanced upon them in the meantime, and they must therefore run for the bulk of the year upon very small margins of profit. But the men, noticing in the papers the great boom in steel rails, very naturally demand their share of the advance, and under our existing faulty arrangements between capital and labor, they have secured it. The employers, therefore, have grudgingly given what they know under proper arrangements they should not have been required to give, and there has been friction and still is dissatisfaction upon the part of the employers. Reverse this picture. The steel rail market falls again. The mills have still 6 months' work at prices above the prevailing market, and can afford to pay men higher wages than the then existing state of the market would apparently justify. But having just been immersed in extra payments for labor which they should not have paid, they naturally attempt to reduce wages as the market price of the rails goes down, and there arises discontent among the men, and we have a repetition of the negotiations and strikes which have characterized the beginning of this year. In other words, when the employer is going down, the employee insists on going up, and vice versa. What we must seek is a plan by which men will receive high wages when their employers are receiving high prices for the product, and hence are making large profits, and per contra, when the employers are receiving low prices for product, and therefore small, if any, profits, the men will receive low wages. If this plan can be found, employers and employed will be in the same boat, rejoicing together in their prosperity and calling into play their fortitude together in adversity. There will be no room for quarrels, and instead of a feeling of antagonism, there will be a feeling of partnership between employers and employed. There is a simple means of producing this result, and to its general introduction both employers and employed should steadily bend their energies. Wages should be based upon a sliding scale in proportion to the net prices received for product month by month. It is impossible for capital to defraud labor under a sliding scale." End quote. One advantage of this library, Carnegie Library at Braddock, Pennsylvania, will be that it will bring before you every local newspaper and every trade journal, and I beg you all to read these carefully. You will find many misstatements, many blunders. These are inseparable from the newspaper press, which must work hastily and report even rumors. But by studying the principal journals, the tendency of affairs can be correctly seen. Newspapers will not give you a correct statement of the prices of material. Manufacturers are disposed to give the brightest coloring to the situation, to report the highest sales made with a view to maintain prices and induce customers to purchase. They will probably not report how low they have been compelled to sell in order to meet competition and keep works running. Nevertheless, a careful perusal of the newspapers and trade journals, as I have said, will enable you to form a general opinion of the trend of events in the commercial world. If you read the papers today, you will know that out of 13 mills engaged in the manufacture of steel rails in this country, not more than 3 are running to their capacity. Only 1 mill in all the West is making rails, North Chicago, and I am sorry to say that it seems probable that even that one will not be able to run continuously. The most melancholy feature in all the disputes between labor and capital is that it is scarcely ever capital that succeeds in breaking down the price of labor, but alas, it is labor which stabs labor. Look around you and see labor working for 10, 20, and even 30% less in some mills, and at Johnstown and Harrisburg for less than 1/2 what we pay for skilled labor in this district. And then in your hearts blame not capital, but consider employers who regret their reductions in wages, who stand out against them and run for years at higher prices as the best friends of labor, even although at last they must frankly confess that if they are to give their men steady employment and save their capital and works, they are forced to ask them to work at the rates obtained by their competitors. The first employer who reduces labor is labor's enemy, but the last employer to reduce labor may be labor's staunchest friend. The fatal enemy of labor is labor, not capital. The greatest character in the public life of Britain and the staunchest friend of the Republic in its hour of need, the radical John Bright, being once asked what was his most valuable acquisition, replied, "A taste for reading." I can truthfully say from my own experience that I agree with that great man. Most anxious to give you the best advice in my power, I advise you to cultivate the taste for reading. When I was a boy in my teens in Allegheny City, Colonel Anderson, whose memory I must ever revere, who had a few hundred books, gave notice that he would lend these books every Saturday afternoon to boys and young men. You cannot imagine with what anxiety some of us who embraced this opportunity to obtain knowledge looked forward to every Saturday afternoon when we could get one book exchanged for another. The principal partner with me in all our business, Mr. Phipps, equally with myself, had obtained access to the stores of knowledge by means of this benefactor. It is from personal experience that I feel that there is no human arrangement so powerful for good, there is no benefit that can be bestowed upon a community so great as that which places within the reach of all the treasures of the world which are stored up in books. We occasionally find traces, even at this day, of the old prejudice which existed against educating the masses of the people. I do not wonder that this should exist when I reflect upon what has hitherto passed for education. Men have wasted their precious years trying to extract education from an ignorant past, whose chief province is to teach us not what to adopt, but what to avoid. Men have sent their sons to college to waste their energies upon obtaining a knowledge of such languages as Greek and Latin, which are of no more practical use to them than Choctaw. I have known few college graduates that knew Shakespeare or Milton. They might be able to tell you all about Ulysses or Agamemnon or Hector, but what are these compared to the characters that we find in our own classics? One service Russell Lowell has done, for which he should be thanked. He has boldly said that in Shakespeare alone we have a greater treasure than in all the classics of ancient time. They have been crammed with the details of petty and insignificant skirmishes between savages and taught to exalt a band of ruffians into heroes, and we have called them educated. They have been educated as if they were destined for life upon some other planet than this. They have in no sense received instruction. On the contrary, what they have obtained has served to imbue them with false ideas and to give them a distaste for practical life. I do not wonder that a prejudice has arisen and still exists against such education. In my own experience, I can say that I have known few young men intended for business who were not injured by a collegiate education. Had they gone into active work during the years spent at college, they would have been better educated men in every true sense of that term. The fire and energy have been stamped out of them, and how to so manage as to live a life of idleness and not a life of usefulness has become the chief question with them. But a new idea of education is now upon us. We have begun to realize that a knowledge of chemistry, for instance, is worth more than a knowledge of all the dead languages that ever were spoken, a knowledge of mechanics more useful than all the classical learning that can be crammed into young men at college. What is the young man to do who knows Greek with a young man who knows stenography or telegraphy, for instance, or bookkeeping, or chemistry, or the laws of mechanics in these days? Not that any kind of knowledge is to be underrated. All knowledge is, in a sense, useful. The point I wish to make is this, that except for the few who have the taste for the antiquarian and who find that their work in life is to delve among the dusty records of the past, and for the few that lead professional lives, the education given today in our colleges is a positive disadvantage. The lack of education in its true sense has done more than all the other causes combined to prevent the universal recognition of labor. I remember that the great president, the greatest of all railway managers, Edgar Thomson, after whom the works here are called, once asked me to remove from Pittsburgh to be master of machinery of the Pennsylvania Railroad. Well, you may smile. And I said to Mr. Thomson, "Why, Mr. Thomson, you amaze me. I know nothing whatever about machinery." "That is the reason I want you to take charge of it," he replied. "I have never known a mechanic with judgment and good sense, except one." This was before the time of Captain Jones, so he could not have referred to the captain. This lack of judgment in mechanics was because at that day in this country they had failed to receive an all-round education. I mean the true education and knowledge of matters and things in general, by which we are surrounded and with which we have to deal. The unprecedented success which has attended the development of the Bessemer works in this country has arisen from this cause, above all others, that, unlike the manufacture of iron, it has fallen into the hands of men of great scientific knowledge. The services of these men are recognized throughout the world and receive compensation which a few years ago would have been considered enormous, and in consequence they have lifted mechanical labor with them and served to dignify it in the eyes of the world. The mechanic, the mechanical engineer, the manager of steel mills are now titles of honor. If you want to make labor what it should be, educate yourself in useful knowledge. That is the moral I would emphasize. Get knowledge, cultivate a taste for reading, that you may know what the world has done and is doing, and the drift of affairs. The value of the education which young men can now receive cannot be overestimated, and it is to this education, as given in technical schools, to which I wish to call your attention. Time was when men had so little knowledge that it was easy for one man to embrace it all, and the courses in colleges bear painful evidence of this fact today. Knowledge is now so various, so extensive, so minute, that it is impossible for any man to know thoroughly more than one small branch. This is the age of the specialist. Therefore, you who have to make your living in this world should resolve to know the art which gives you support, to know that thoroughly and well, to be an expert in your specialty. If you are a mechanic, then from this library study every work bearing upon the subject of mechanics. If you are a chemist, then every work bearing upon chemistry. If you are at the blast furnaces, then every work upon the blast furnace. If in the mines, then every work upon mining. Let no man know more of your specialty than you do yourself. That should be your ideal. Then, far less important, but still important, to bring sweetness and light into your life, be sure to read promiscuously and know a little about as many things as you have time to read about. Just as on his farm the farmer must first attend well to his potatoes and his corn and his wheat, from which he derives his revenue, so he may spend his spare hours as a labor of love in cultivating the flowers that surround his home. One domain your work, the other your recreation. In these days of transition and of struggles between labor and capital, to no better purpose can you devote a few of your spare hours than to a study of economic questions. There are certain great laws which will be obeyed, the law of supply and demand, the law of competition, the law of wages and profits. All these you will find laid down in the textbooks, and remember that there is no more possibility of defeating the operation of these laws than there is of thwarting the laws of nature which determine the humidity of the atmosphere or the revolution of the earth upon its axis. A severe study of scientific books must not be permitted to exclude the equally important duty of reading the masters of literature, and by all means of fiction. The feeling which prevails in some quarters against fiction is, in my opinion, only a prejudice. I know that some, indeed most, of the eminent men find in a good work of fiction one of the best means of enjoyment and of rest. When exhausted in mind and body, and especially in mind, nothing is so beneficial to them as to read a good novel. The fact that they know more about a problem than their fellows and are able to suggest the remedy or improvement is what is of value to them and their employer. There is no means so sure for enabling the workman to rise to the foremanship, managership, and finally partnership as knowledge of all that has been done and is being done in the world today in the special department in which he labors. From the highest down to the lowest, a better grade of service is rendered by the intelligent man than it is possible for the ignorant man to render. His knowledge always comes in, and whether you have knowledge on the part of the manager who directs or of the man who only handles a shovel, you have in him a valuable employee in proportion to his knowledge, other things being equal. In the course of my experience as a manufacturer, I know our firm has made many mistakes by neglecting one simple rule: never to undertake anything new until your managers have had an opportunity to examine everything that has been done throughout this world in that department. Neglect of this has cost us many hundreds of thousands of dollars, and we have become wise. Now I say here to the man who is ambitious to learn, who perhaps thinks that he has some improvement in his mind, here in the rooms of this library there is, or I hope soon will be, the whole world's experience upon that subject, brought right before you down to a recent date. In any question of mechanics, or any question of chemistry, any question of furnace practice, you will find the records of the world at your disposal here. If you are on the wrong track, these books will tell you. If you are on the right track, they will tell you. If you are on the right track, they will afford you encouragement. You can go through hall after hall in the patent office in Washington and see thousands of models of inventions bearing upon all branches of human industry, and 99 out of every 100 would never have been placed there had the ignorant inventor had at command such facilities as will be yours in this library. I have heard employers say that there was great danger that the masses of the people might become too well educated to be content in their useful and necessary occupations. It has required an effort upon my part to listen to this doctrine with patience. It is all wrong. I give it an unqualified contradiction. The trouble between capital and labor is just in proportion to the ignorance of the employer and the ignorance of the employed. The more intelligent the employer, the better, and the more intelligent the employed, the better. It is never education, it is never knowledge that produces collision. It is always ignorance on the part of one or the other of the two forces. Speaking from an experience not inconsiderable, I make this statement. Capital is ignorant of the necessities and the just dues of labor, and labor is ignorant of the necessities and dangers of capital. That is the true origin of friction between them. More knowledge on the part of capital of the good qualities of those that serve it, and some knowledge on the part of the men of the economic laws which hold the capitalists in their relentless grasp, would obviate most of the difficulties which arise between these two forces, which are indispensably necessary to each other. I hope that those of our men who possess that inestimable prize, the taste for reading, will make it a point to study carefully a few of the fundamental laws from which there is no escape, either on the part of labor or capital. If this library be instrumental in the slightest degree in spreading knowledge in this department, it will have justified its existence. I trust that you will not forget the importance of amusements. Life must not be taken too seriously. It is a great mistake to think that the man who works all the time wins the race. Have your amusements. Learn to play a good game of whist or a good game of draughts or a good game of billiards. Become interested in baseball or cricket or horses, anything that will give you innocent enjoyment and relieve you from the usual strain. There is not anything better than a good laugh. I attribute most of my success in life to the fact that, as my partners often say, trouble runs off my back like water from a duck. There is a poetical quotation from Shakespeare that is applicable. It is to wear your troubles as your outsides, like your garments, carelessly. Many men are to be met with in this life who would have been great and successful had the world rated them at the value which they placed upon themselves. This class are the victims of an hallucination. Nobody in the world desires to keep down ability. Everybody in the world has an outstretched hand for it. Every employer of labor is studying the young men around him, most anxious to find one of exceptional ability. Nothing in the world so desirable for him and so profitable for him as such a man. Every manager in the works stands ready to grasp, to utilize the man that can do something that is valuable. Every foreman wants to have under him in his department able men upon whom he can rely and whose merits he obtains credit for, because the greatest test of ability in a manager is not the man himself, but the men with whom he is able to surround himself. These books on the shelves will tell you the story of the rise of many men from our own ranks. It is not the educated or so-called classically educated man. It is not the aristocracy. It is not the monarchs that have ruled the destinies of the world, either in camp, council, laboratory, or workshop. The great inventions, the improvements, the discoveries in science, the great works in literature have sprung from the ranks of the poor. You can scarcely name a great invention or a great discovery. You can scarcely name a great picture or a great statue, a great song or a great story, nor anything great that has not been the product of men who started like yourselves to earn an honest living by honest work. And believe me, the man whom the foreman does not appreciate, and the foreman whom the manager does not appreciate, and the manager whom the firm does not appreciate, has to find the fault not in the firm, nor the manager, nor the foreman, but in himself. He cannot give the service, that which is so invaluable and so anxiously looked for. There is no man who may not rise to the highest position, nor is there any man who, from lack of the right qualities or failure to exercise them, may not sink to the lowest. Employees have chances to rise to higher work, to rise to be foremen, to be superintendents, and even to rise to be partners, and even to be chairmen in our service, if they prove themselves possessed of the qualities required. They need never fear being dispensed with. It is we who fear that the abilities of such men may be lost to us. It is highly gratifying to know that the hours of labor are being gradually reduced throughout the country. 8 hours to work, 8 hours to play, 8 hours to sleep seems the ideal division. If we could only establish by law that all manufacturing concerns which run day and night should use 3 turns, it would be most desirable. You know, we tried to do so for several years at a cost of some hundreds of thousands of dollars, but were finally compelled by our competitors to give up the struggle. The best plan, perhaps, is to reach it by slow degrees through state laws. No one firm can do much. All its competitors in the various states must be compelled to do likewise, for in our days profits are upon so narrow a margin that no firm can run its works except under similar conditions with its competitors. It is necessary, therefore, that laws should be secured, binding upon all. We should be glad to support such a law, but even as at present, if workmen use well the time they have at their disposal, they will soon rise to higher positions. You need not work 12 hours very long. Most of us have worked more hours than 12 in our youth. The workman has many advantages today over his predecessors. A sliding scale for his labor ranks him higher than before as a man and a citizen. The proportion of the joint earnings of capital and labor given to labor never was so great and is constantly rising. The earnings of capital never were so low. I hope the future is to add many more advantages, and that the toilsome march which labor has had to make on its way from serfdom, when our forefathers were bought and sold with the mines and factories they worked, up to its present condition, is not yet ended, but that it is destined to continue and lead to other important results for the benefit and dignity of labor. End of Section 2. The Common Interest of Labor and Capital.
Section 3 of The Empire of Business by Andrew Carnegie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Empire of Business. Section 3. Thrift as a Duty. The Duties of Rich Men. The importance of the subject is suggested by the fact that the habit of thrift constitutes one of the greatest differences between the savage and the civilized man. One of the fundamental differences between savage and civilized life is the absence of thrift in the one and the presence of it in the other. When millions of men each receive a little of their daily earnings, these petty sums combined make an enormous amount, which is called capital, about which so much is written. If men consumed each day of each week all they earned, as does the savage, of course there would be no capital, that is, no savings laid up for future use. Now let us see what capital does in the world. We will consider what the shipbuilders do when they have to build great ships. These enterprising companies offer to build an ocean greyhound for, let us say, £500,000, to be paid only when the ship is delivered after satisfactory trial trips. Where or how do the shipbuilders get this sum of money to pay the workmen, the wood merchant, the steel manufacturer, and all the people who furnish material for the building of the ship? They get it from the savings of civilized men. It is part of the money saved for investment by the millions of industrious people. Each man, by thrift, saves a little, puts the money in a bank, and the bank lends it to the shipbuilders, who pay interest for the use of it. It is the same with the building of a manufactory a railroad, a canal, or anything costly, we could not have had anything more than the savage had, except for thrift. Thrift the first duty. Hence, thrift is mainly at the bottom of all improvement. Without it, no railroads, no canals, no ships, no telegraphs, no churches, no universities, no schools, no newspapers, nothing great or costly could we have. Man must exercise thrift and save before he can produce anything material of great value. There was nothing built, no great progress made, as long as man remained a thriftless savage. The civilized man had no clearer duty than from early life to keep steadily in view the necessity of providing for the future of himself and those dependent upon him. There are few rules more salutary than that which has been followed by most wise and good men, namely, that expenses should always be less than income. In other words, one should be a civilized man, saving something, and not a savage, consuming every day all that which he has earned. The great poet Burns, in his advice to a young man, says, "To catch Dame Fortune's golden smile, assiduous wait upon her, and gather gear by every wile that's justified by honor. Not for to hide it in a hedge, not for a train attendant, but for the glorious privilege of being independent." That is sound advice so far as it goes, and I hope the reader will take it to heart and adopt it. No proud, self-respecting person can ever be happy or even satisfied who has to be dependent upon others for his necessary wants. He who is dependent has not reached the full measure of manhood, and can hardly be counted among the worthy citizens of the Republic. The safety and progress of our country depend not upon the highly educated man, nor the few millionaires, nor upon the greater number of the extreme poor, but upon the mass of sober, intelligent, industrious, and saving workers, who are neither very rich nor very poor. Thrift duty has its limit. As a rule, you will find that the saving man is a temperate man, a good husband and father, a peaceful, law-abiding citizen. Nor need the saving be great. It is surprising how little it takes to provide for the real necessities of life. A little home paid for and a few £100, a very few, make all the difference. These are more easily acquired by frugal people than you might suppose. Great wealth is quite another, and a far less desirable matter. It is not the aim of thrift nor the duty of men to acquire millions. It is in no respect a virtue to set this before us as an end. Duty to save ends when just money enough has been set aside to provide comfortably for those dependent upon us. Hoarding millions is avarice, not thrift. Of course, under our industrial conditions, it is inevitable that a very few men will find money coming to them far beyond their wants. The accumulation of millions is usually the result of enterprise and judgment, and some exceptional ability for organization. It does not come from savings in the ordinary sense of that word. Men who in old age strive only to increase their already great hoards are usually slaves of the habit of hoarding formed in their youth. At first they own the money they have made and saved. Later in life the money owns them, and they cannot help themselves. So overpowering is the force of habit, either for good or evil. It is the abuse of the civilized saving instinct, and not its use, that produces this class of men. No one need be afraid of falling a victim to this abuse of the habit if he always bears in mind that whatever surplus wealth may come to him is to be regarded as a sacred trust, which he is bound to administer for the good of his fellows. The man should always be master. He should keep money in the position of a useful servant. He must never let it master and make a miser of him. A man's first duty is to make a competence and be independent. But his whole duty does not end there. It is his duty to do something for his needy neighbors who are less favored than himself. It is his duty to contribute to the general good of the community in which he lives. He has been protected by its laws. Because he has been protected in his various enterprises, he has been able to make money sufficient for his needs and those of his family. All beyond this belongs in justice to the protecting power that has fostered him and enabled him to win pecuniary success. To try to make the world in some way better than you found it is to have a noble motive in life. Your surplus wealth should contribute to the development of your own character and place you in the ranks of nature's noblemen. It is no less than a duty for you to understand how important it is, and how clear your duty is, to form the habit of thrift. When you begin to earn, always save some part of your earnings, like a civilized man, instead of spending all like the poor savage. End of Section 3. Thrift as a Duty.
Section 4 of The Empire of Business by Andrew Carnegie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tina Ding. The Empire of Business. Section 4. How to Win Fortune. Labor is divided into two great armies, the agricultural and the industrial. In these, diverse forces are in operation. In the former, everything tends to a further distribution of land among the many. In the latter, everything tends to a concentration of business in the hands of the few. One of the two great fallacies upon which Progress and Poverty, Mr. George's book, is founded is that the land is getting more and more into the hands of the few. Now, the only source from which Mr. George could obtain correct information upon this point is the census, and this tells us that in 1850, the average extent of farms in the United States was 203 acres. In 1860, 199 acres. In 1870, 153 acres, and that in 1880, it was still further reduced to 134 acres. The reason is obvious for this rapid distribution of the land. The farmer who cultivates a small farm by his own labor is able to drive out of the field the ambitious capitalist who attempts to farm upon a large scale with the labor of others. In Great Britain, nothing has been more significant than that the tillers of small farms have passed through the agricultural depression there far better than those who cultivated large farms. So, in both countries, we have proof that under the free play of equal laws, land is becoming more and more divided among the masses of the people. In the whole range of social questions, no fact is more important than this, and nothing gives the thoughtful student greater satisfaction. The triumph of the small proprietor over the large proprietor ensures the growth and maintenance of that element in society upon which civilization can most securely depend, for there is no force in the nation so conservative of what is good, so fair, so virtuous, as a race of men who till the soil they own. Happily for mankind, experience proves that man cannot work more soil profitably than he can till himself with the aid of his own family. When we turn to the other army of labor, the industrial, we are obliged to confess that it is swayed by the opposite law, which tends to concentrate manufacturing and business affairs generally in a few vast establishments. The fall in prices of manufactured articles has been startling. Never were the principal articles of consumption so low as they are today. This cheapening process is made possible only by concentration. We find 1,700 watches per day turned out by one company, and watches are sold for a few dollars apiece. We have mills making many thousand yards of calico per day, and this necessary article is to be had for a few cents per yard. Manufacturers of steel make 2,500 tons per day, and 4 pounds of finished steel are sold for 5 cents, and so on through the entire range of industries. Divide the huge factories into smaller establishments, and it will be found impossible to manufacture some of the articles at all. The success of the process being often dependent on its being operated upon a large scale, while the cost of such articles as could be produced in small establishments would be 2 or 3 times their present prices. There does not appear to be any counteracting force to this law of concentration in the industrial world. On the contrary, the active forces at work seem to demand greater and greater output or turnover from each establishment in order that the minimum of cost should be reached. Hence comes the rapid and continuous increase of the capital of manufacturing and commercial concerns, 5, 10, 15, and even 20 millions being sometimes massed in one corporation. Has the young man now a chance? This has given rise to a complaint which is often heard, but which I hope to show has no foundation. The young practical man points to these and says to himself, quote, "It is no longer possible for our class without capital to rise beyond the position of employees upon salaries. There is a lion in the path which leads to independent commands or to partnership, and this lion is the huge establishments already existing, which are an impassable barrier to our advancement." End quote. The man engaged in the agricultural army, as we have seen, has nothing to fear from capital. With a small sum, which is not very difficult for him to save or borrow, he can begin farming, the only competition with which he has to contend being that of others of his own class situated like himself. It is certainly more difficult for a mechanic or practical man to establish a new business or to win partnership in one that exists than it is for the young farmer to begin his business. Yet the difficulties are not insuperable, nor greater than have hitherto existed. They are not such as to stimulate the ambitious, and this is always to be taken into account that if the race in the industrial and business world be harder to win, the prize is infinitely greater. Before considering the prospects of the mechanic in the industrial, of the clerk in the mercantile, commercial, and financial worlds, let me show that no classes other than these two have had much to do with establishing the factories, business houses, and financial institutions which are best known in the United States today. And first, as to the part of trained mechanics, I select the best known industrial establishments in each department, many of them the most extensive works of their kind and of worldwide reputation. Baldwin Works for locomotives, Sellers and Company, Beman and Doherty for mechanical tools, Distance Works for saws, works of the Messrs. Dobson and of Thomas Dolan, Philadelphia, and Gary of Baltimore, textile fabrics, Fairbanks for scales, Studebakers for wagons, who count their wagons by the acre, Pullman of Chicago, Allison of Philadelphia for cars, Washburn and Moen and Cleveland rolling mills, steel wire, etc. Bartlett Iron Founder, Baltimore, Sloan's, also Higgins, carpets, Westinghouse electrical apparatus, Peter Henderson and Company and Landreth and Company, seeds, Harper Brothers, publishers, Babbitt for Babbitt's Metal, Otis Works, Cleveland, boiler steel, the Remington Works and Colts Works, Hartford, firearms, Singer Company, Hull, Grover, sewing machines, McCormick Works of Chicago, Balls of Canton, and Walter A. Woods for agricultural implements, steamship building, Roach, Cramp, Nearfee on the Atlantic, Scott upon the Pacific, Parkhurst, Wheeler, Kirby, McDougall, Craig, Coffinbury, Wallace, the leading officials of shipbuilding companies on our Great Lakes. Horseshoes, Burton's. Atterbury Works for glass. Grotzinger's tanning. Ames Works for shuffles. Steinway, Chickering, and Knabe pianos. Every one of these great works was founded and managed by mechanics, men who served their apprenticeship. The list could be greatly extended, and if we were to include those which were created by men who entered life as office boys or clerks, we should embrace almost every famous manufacturing concern in the country. Edison, for instance, was a telegraph operator. Corliss of Corliss engine, Cheney of Cheney silk, Roebling of wire fame, Spreckels in sugar refining, all and many more captains of industry were poor boys with natural aptitude, to whom a regular apprenticeship was scarcely necessary. In the mercantile, commercial, and financial branches of business, which are all under the law which drives business affairs into large concerns, the poor clerk takes the place of the trained mechanic in the industrial world. Cleveland's, Jeffreys, Sloan's, the Lords, the Taylors, the Phelpses, the Dodges, the gigantic houses of Jordan and Marsh in Boston, of Field in Chicago, Barr in St. Louis, Wanamaker in Philadelphia, Meldrum and Anderson, Buffalo, Newcomb, Endicott and Company, Detroit, Taylor, Cleveland, Daniels and Fisher, Denver, Horn and Campbell and Dick, Pittsburgh. All these and the corresponding houses throughout the country, as far as I am able to trace their history, have the same story to tell. Wanamaker, Cleveland, Jordan, Lord, Field, Barr, and the others, all poor boys in the store, and Phelps and Dodge both poor clerks. In banking and finance, it is an oft-repeated story that our Stanfords, Rockefellers, Goulds, Sages, Fields, Dillons, Seligmans, Wilsons, and Huntingtons came from the ranks. The millionaires who are in active control started as poor boys and were trained in that sternest but most efficient of all schools, poverty. Where is the college-made man? I asked a city banker to give me a few names of presidents and vice presidents and cashiers of our great New York City banks who had begun as boys or clerks. He sent me 36 names and wrote he would send me more next day. I cannot take the reader's time with a complete list, but here are a few of the best known. Williams, President, Chemical Bank. Watson and Lang, Bank of Montreal. Tappan, President, Gallican National. Brinkerhoff, President, Butchers and Drovers Bank. Clark, Vice President, American Exchange. Jewett, President, Irvin National. Harris, President, Nassau Bank. Crane, President, Shoe and Leather Bank. Nash, President, Corn Exchange Bank. Kennan, President, Chase National. Kennan, Vice President, Fourth National. Montague, President, Second National. Baker, President, First National. Hamilton, Vice President, Bowery Bank, and so on. The absence of the college graduate in this list should be deeply weighed. I have inquired and searched everywhere in all quarters, but find small trace of him as the leader in affairs, although not seldom occupying positions of trust in financial institutions. Nor is this surprising. The prize takers have too many years the start of the graduate, They have entered for the race invariably in their teens, in the most valuable of all the years for learning from 14 to 20, while the college student has been learning a little about the Barbaras and petty squabbles of a far distant past, or trying to master languages which are dead, such knowledge as seems adapted for life upon another planet than this, as far as business affairs are concerned. The future captain of industry is hotly engaged in the school of experience, obtaining the very knowledge required for his future triumphs. I do not speak of the effect of college education upon young men training for the learned professions, for which it is, up to a certain point, almost indispensable in our day for the average youth, but the almost total absence of the graduate from high position in the business world seems to justify the conclusion that college education as it exists seems almost fatal to success in that domain. It is to be noted that salaried officials are not in a strict sense in business. A captain of industry is one who makes his all in his business and depends upon success for compensation. It is in this field that the graduate has little chance, entering at 20 against the boy who swept the office or who begins as shipping clerk at 14. The facts prove this. There are some instances of the sons of businessmen, graduates of colleges, who address themselves to a business life and succeed in managing a business already created. But even these are few compared with those who fail in keeping the fortune received. There has come, however, in recent years, the Polytechnic and Scientific School, or course of study for boys, which is beginning to show most valuable fruits in the manufacturing branch. The trained mechanic of the past, who has, as we have seen, hitherto carried off most of the honors in our industrial works, is now to meet a rival in the scientifically educated youth who will push him hard, very hard indeed. Three of the largest steel manufacturing concerns in the world are already under the management of three young educated men. Students of these schools who left theory at school for practice in the works while yet in their teens. Walker, Illinois Steel Company, Chicago. Schwab, Edgar Thomson Works. Potter, Homestead Steel Works, Pittsburgh, are types of the new product, not one of them yet 30. Most of the chiefs of departments under them are of the same class. Such young educated men have one important advantage over the apprenticed mechanic. They are open-minded and without prejudice. The scientific attitude of mind, that of the searcher after truth, renders them receptive of new ideas. Great and invaluable as the working mechanic has been, and is, and will always be, yet he is disposed to adopt narrow views of affairs, for he is generally well up in years before he comes into power. It is different with the scientifically trained boy. He has no prejudices and goes in for the latest invention or newest method, no matter if another has discovered it. He adopts the plan that will beat the record and discards his own devices or ideas, which the working mechanic superintendent can rarely be induced to do. Let no one, therefore, underrate the advantage of education. Only it must be education adapted to the end in view, and must give instruction bearing upon a man's career if he is to make his way to fortune. Thus, in the financial, commercial, and mercantile branches of business, as in manufacturing, we have to ask not what place the educated mechanic and practical man occupy, but what these two types have left for others throughout the entire business world. Very little indeed have they left. In the industrial department, the trained mechanic is the founder and manager of famous concerns. In the mercantile, commercial, and financial, it is the poor office boy who has proved to be the merchant prince in disguise, who surely comes into his heritage. They are the winning classes. It is the poor clerk and the working mechanic who finally rule in every branch of affairs, without capital, without family influence, and without college education. It is they who have risen to the top and taken command, who have abandoned salaried positions and boldly risk all in the founding of a business. College graduates will usually be found under salaries, trusted subordinates. Neither capital, nor influence, nor college learning, nor all combined have proved able to contend in business successfully against the energy and indomitable will which spring from all conquering poverty. Lest anything here said may be construed as tending to decry or disparage university education, let me clearly state that those addressed are the fortunate poor young men who have to earn a living. For such as can afford to obtain a university degree and have means sufficient to ensure a livelihood, the writer is the last man to advise its rejection. Compared with which, all the pecuniary gains of the multimillionaire are dross. But for poor youth, the earning of a competence is a duty, and duty done is worth even more than university education, precious as that is. Liberal education gives a man who really absorbs it higher tastes and aims than the acquisition of wealth, and a world to enjoy into which the mere millionaire cannot enter. To find, therefore, that it is not the best training for business is to prove its claim to a higher domain. True education can be obtained outside of the schools. Genius is not an indigenous plant in the groves academic, a wild flower found in the woods all by itself, needing no care from society, but average men needs universities. Are corporations to disappear? The young practical men of today working at the bench or counter, to whom the fair goddess Fortune has not yet beckoned, may be disposed to conclude that it is impossible to start business in this age. There is something in that. It is no doubt infinitely more difficult to start a new business of any kind today than it was. But it is only a difference in form, not in substance. It is infinitely easier for a young practical man of ability to obtain an interest in existing firms than it has ever been. The doors have not closed upon ability. On the contrary, they swing easier upon their hinges. Capital is not requisite. Family influence, as before, passes for nothing. Real ability, the capacity for doing things, never was so eagerly searched for as now, and never commanded such rewards. The law, which concentrates the leading industries and commercial, mercantile, and financial affairs in a few great factories or firms, contains within itself another law not less imperious. These vast concerns cannot be successfully conducted by salaried employees. No great business of any kind can score an unusually brilliant and permanent success which is not in the hands of practical men pecuniarily interested in its results. In the industrial world, the days of corporations seem likely to come to an end. It has been necessary for me to watch closely most of my life the operations of great establishments owned by hundreds of absent capitalists and conducted by salaried officers. Contrasted with these, I believe that the partnership conducted by men vitally interested in owning the works will make satisfactory dividends when the corporation is embarrassed and scarcely knows upon which side the balance is to be at the end of a year's operations. The great dry goods houses that interest their most capable men in the profits of each department succeed when those fail that endeavor to work with salaried men only. Even in the management of our great hotels, it is found wise to take into partnership the principal men. In every branch of business, this law is at work, and concerns are prosperous, generally speaking, just in proportion as they succeed in interesting in the profits a larger and larger proportion of their ablest workers. Cooperation in this form is fast coming in all great establishments. The manufacturing business that does not have practical manufacturing partners had better supply the omission without delay, and probably the very men required are the bright young mechanics who have distinguished themselves while working for a few dollars per day, or the youths from the Polytechnic School. Instances constantly occur where the corporation unwilling to interest a promising practical man loses his services and sees an interest given him by some able individual manufacturer or commercial firm who are constantly on the lookout for that indispensable article, ability. It has not hitherto been the practice for corporations properly to reward these embryo managers, but this they must come to if they are to stand the competition of works operated by those interested in the profits. Corporations, on the other hand, as I desire to point out to practical young men, have one advantage. Their shares are sold freely. If a worker wishes to become interested in any branch of manufacturing in America today, the path is easy. For $50 to $100, he can become a stockholder. It is becoming more and more common for workers so to invest their savings. There are many well-managed corporations whose assets and prestige enable them to earn satisfactory returns, and no better evidence of capacity and of good judgment can a workman give to his employers than that furnished by the presence of his name upon the books as a shareholder in the concern. Workingmen have a prejudice against showing their employers that the wages they earn suffice to enable them to save, but this is a mistake. The saving workman is the valuable workman, and the wise employer regards the fact that he does save as prima facie evidence that there is something exceptionally valuable in him. It should be the effort of every corporation to induce its principal workers to invest their savings in its shares. Only in this way can corporations hope to cope successfully with individual manufacturers who have already discovered one of the valuable secrets of unusual success, that is, to share their profits with those who are most instrumental in producing them. The day of the absent capitalist stockholder who takes no interest in the operation of the works beyond the receipt of his dividend is certainly passing away. The day of the valuable active worker in the industrial world is coming. Let, therefore, no young practical workman be discouraged. On the contrary, let him be cheered. More and more it is becoming easier for the mechanic or practical man of real ability to dictate terms to his employers. Where there was one avenue of promotion, there are now a dozen. The enormous concern of the future is to divide its profits, not among hundreds of idle capitalists who contribute nothing to its success, but among hundreds of its ablest employees, upon whose abilities and exertions success greatly depends. The capitalist absent stockholder is to be replaced by the able and present worker. As to the qualifications necessary for the promotion of young practical men, one cannot do better than quote George Eliot, who put the matter very pithily. Quote, "I'll tell you how I got on. I kept my ears and my eyes open, and I made my master's interest my own." End quote. The condition precedent for promotion is that the man must first attract notice. He must do something unusual, and especially must this be beyond the strict boundary of his duties. He must suggest, or save, or perform some service for his employer which he could not be censured for not having done. When he has thus attracted the notice of his immediate superior, whether that be only the foreman of a gang, it matters not. The first great step has been taken, for upon his immediate superior promotion depends. How high he climbs is his own affair. We often hear men complaining that they get no chance to show their ability. When they do show ability, that it is not recognized. There is very little in this. Self-interest compels the immediate superior to give the highest place under him to the men who can best fill it, for the officer is credited with the work of his department as a whole. No man can keep another down. It will be noticed that many of the practical men who have earned fame and fortune have done so through holding on to improvements which they have made. Improvements are easily made by practical men in the branch in which they are engaged, for they have the most intimate knowledge of the problems to be solved there. It is in this way that many of our valuable improvements have come. The man who has made an improvement should always have an eye upon obtaining an interest in the business rather than an increase of salary. Even if the business up to this time has not become very prosperous, if he has the proper stuff in him, he believes that he could make it so, and so he could. All forms of business have their ups and downs. Seasons of depression and buoyancy succeed each other, 1 year of great profits, several years with little or none. This is a law of the business world, into the reasons of which I need not enter. Therefore, the able young practical men should not have much regard as to a choice of the branch of business. Any business properly conducted will yield during a period of years a handsome return. Dangers to young men. There are 3 great rocks ahead of the practical young man who has his foot upon the ladder and is beginning to rise. First, drunkenness, which of course is fatal. There is no use in wasting time upon any young man who drinks liquor, no matter how exceptional his talents. Indeed, the greater his talents are, the greater the disappointment must be. The second rock ahead is speculation. The business of a speculator and that of a manufacturer or man of affairs are not only distinct but incompatible. To be successful in the business world, the manufacturer's and the merchant's profits only should be sought. The manufacturer should go forward steadily, meeting the market price. When there are goods to sell, sell them. When supplies are needed, purchase them, without regard to the market price in either case. I have never known a speculative manufacturer or businessman who scored a permanent success. He is rich one day, bankrupt the next. Besides this, the manufacturer aims to produce articles and in so doing to employ labor. This furnishes a laudable career. A man in this avocation is useful to his kind. The merchant is usefully occupied distributing commodities, the banker in providing capital. The third rock is akin to speculation. Endorsing. Businessmen require irregular supplies of money, at some periods little, at others enormous sums. Others being in the same condition, there is strong temptation to endorse mutually. This rock should be avoided. There are emergencies, no doubt, in which men should help their friends, but there is a rule that will keep one safe. No man should place his name upon the obligation of another if he has not sufficient to pay it without detriment to his own business. It is dishonest to do so. Men are trustees for those who have trusted them, and the creditor is entitled to all his capital and credit. For one's own firm, quote, your name, your fortune, and your sacred honor, end quote. But for others, no matter under what circumstances, only such aid as you can render without danger to your trust. It is a safe rule, therefore, to give the cash direct that you have to spare for others, and never your endorsement or guarantee. One great cause of failure of young men in business is lack of concentration. They are prone to seek outside investments. The cause of many a surprising failure lies in so doing. Every dollar of capital and credit, every business thought should be concentrated upon the one business upon which a man has embarked. He should never scatter his shot. It is a poor business which will not yield better returns for increased capital than any outside investment. No man or set of men or corporation can manage a businessman's capital as well as he can manage it himself. The rule, quote, do not put all your eggs in one basket, end quote, does not apply to a man's life work. Put all your eggs in one basket and then watch that basket is the true doctrine, the most valuable rule of all. While business of all kinds has gone and is still going rapidly into a few vast concerns, it is nevertheless demonstrated every day that genuine ability, interested in the profits, is not only valuable but indispensable to their successful operation. Through corporations whose shares are sold daily upon the market, through partnership that finds it necessary to interest their ablest workers, through merchants who can manage their vast enterprises successfully only by interesting exceptional ability. In every quarter of the business world, avenues greater in number, wider in extent, easier of access than ever before existed, stand open to the sober, frugal, energetic, and able mechanic, to the scientifically educated youth, to the office boy, and to the clerk, avenues through which they can reap greater successes than were ever before within the reach of these classes in the history of the world. When, therefore, the young man in any position or in any business explains and complains that he has not opportunity to prove his ability and to rise to partnership, the old answer suffices. Quote, the fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings. End quote. End of section 4. How to Win Fortune. Section 5 of The Empire of Business by Andrew Carnegie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tina Ding. The Empire of Business. Section 5. Wealth and its Uses. Wealth, as Mr. Gladstone has recently said, quote, is the business of the world, end quote. That the acquisition of money is the business of the world arises from the fact that, with few unfortunate exceptions, Young men are born to poverty, and therefore, under the salutary operation of that remarkably wise law which makes for their good, quote, "Thou shalt earn thy bread by the sweat of thy brow." End quote. It is the fashion nowadays to bewail poverty as an evil, to pity the young man who is not born with a silver spoon in his mouth. But I heartily subscribe to President Garfield's doctrine that, quote, "the richest heritage a young man can be born to is poverty." End quote. I make no idle prediction when I say that it is from that class from whom the good and the great will spring. It is not from the sons of the millionaire or the noble that the world receives its teachers, its martyrs, its inventors, its statesmen, its poets, or even its men of affairs. It is from the cottage of the poor that all these spring. We can scarcely read one among the few immortal names that were not born to die, or who has rendered exceptional service to our race, who had not the advantage of being cradled, nursed, and reared in the stimulating school of poverty. There is nothing so enervating, nothing so deadly in its effects upon the qualities which lead to the highest achievement, moral or intellectual, as hereditary wealth. And if there be among you a young man who feels that he is not compelled to exert himself in order to earn and live from his own efforts, I tender him my profound sympathy. Should such an one prove an exception to his fellows, and become a citizen living a life creditable to himself and useful to the state, instead of my profound sympathy, I bow before him with profound reverence. For one who overcomes the seductive temptations which surround hereditary wealth is of the salt of the earth and entitled to double honor. One gets a great many good things from the New York Sun, the distinguished proprietor and editor of which you had recently the pleasure, benefit, and honor of hearing. I beg to read this to you as one of its numerous rays of light. Our boys. Quote, "Every moralist hard up for a theme asks at intervals, what is the matter with the sons of our rich and great men? The question is followed by statistics on the wickedness and bad endings of such sons. The trouble with the moralist is that they put the question wrong end first. There is nothing wrong with those foolish sons, except that they are unlucky. But there is something wrong with their fathers. Suppose that a fine specimen of an old deerhound, very successful in his business, should collect untold deer in the park, fatten them up, and then say to his puppies, 'Here, boys, I've had a hard life catching these deer, and I mean to see you enjoy yourselves. I'm so used to racing through the woods and hunting that I can't get out of the habit, but you boys just pile into that park and help yourselves.' Such a deer hound as that would be scorned by every human father. The human father would say to such a dog, 'Mr. Hound, you're simply ruining those puppies. Too much meat and no exercise will give them the mange and 17 other troubles, and if distemper doesn't kill them, they will be a knock-kneed, watery-eyed lot of disgraces to you. For heaven's sake, keep them down to dog biscuits and work them hard.' That same human father does with great pride the very thing that he would condemn in a dog or a cat. He ruins his children, and then, when he gets old, profusely and sadly observes that he has done everything for them, and yet they have disappointed him. He who gives to his son an office which he has not deserved and enables him to disgrace his father and friends deserves no more sympathy than any Mr. Fagin deliberately educating a boy to be dishonest. The fat, useless pug dogs which young women drag wheezing about at the end of strings are not to blame for their condition, and the same thing is true of Richmond's sons. The young women who overfeed the dogs and the fathers who ruin their sons have themselves to thank. No men would advocate the thing, perhaps, but who can doubt that if there could be a law making it impossible for men to inherit anything but a good education and a good constitution, it would supply us in short order with a better lot of men. End quote. This is sound. If you see it in the sun, it is so. At least it is in this case. It is not the poor young man who goes forth to his work in the morning and labors until evening that we should pity. It is the son of the rich man to whom Providence has not been so kind as to trust with this honorable task. It is not the busy man, but the man of idleness, who should arouse our sympathy and cause us sorrow. Happy is the man who has found his work, says Carlyle. I say, happy is the man who has to work and to work hard and work long. A great poet has said, he prayeth best who loveth best. Some day this may be parodied into, he prayeth best who worketh best. An honest day's work, well performed, is not a bad sort of prayer. The cry goes forth often nowadays, abolish poverty! But fortunately this cannot be done, and the poor we are always to have with us. Abolish poverty, and what would become of the race? Progress, development would cease. Consider its future if dependent upon the rich. The supply of the good and the great would cease, and human society retrograde into barbarism. Abolish luxury, if you please, but leave us the soil upon which alone the virtues and all that is precious in human character grow. Poverty, honest poverty. I will assume for the moment, gentlemen, that you were all fortunate enough to be born poor. Then the first question that presses upon you is this: what shall I learn to do for the community which will bring me in exchange enough wealth to feed, clothe, lodge, and keep me independent of charitable aid from others? What shall I do for a living? And the young man may like or think that he would like to do one thing rather than another, to pursue one branch or another, to be a businessman or craftsman of some kind, or minister, physician, electrician, architect, editor, or lawyer. I have no doubt some of you in your wildest flights aspire to be journalists. But it does not matter what the young man likes or dislikes. He always has to keep in view the main point. Can I attain such a measure of proficiency in the branch preferred as will certainly enable me to earn a livelihood by its practice? The young man, therefore, who resolves to make himself useful to his kind, and therefore entitled to receive in return from a grateful community which he benefits the sum necessary for his support, sees clearly one of the highest duties of a young man. He meets the vital question immediately pressing upon him for decision, and decides it rightly. So far, then, there's no difference about the acquisition of wealth. Every one is agreed that it is the first duty of a young man to so train himself as to be self-supporting. Nor is there difficulty about the next step, for the young man cannot be said to have performed the whole of his duty if he leaves out of account the contingencies of life, liability to accident, illness, and trade depressions like the present. Wisdom calls upon him to have regard for these things, and it is a part of his duty that he begin to save a portion of his earnings and invest them, not in speculation, but in securities or in property or in a legitimate business in such form as will perhaps slowly but yet surely grow into the reserve upon which he can fall back in emergencies or in old age and live upon his own savings. I think we are all agreed as to the advisability, nay, the duty, of laying up a competence, and hence to retain our self-respect. Besides this, I take it that some of you have already decided just as soon as possible to ask a certain young lady to share his lot, or perhaps his lots, and of course he should have a lot or two to share. Marriage is a very serious business indeed, and gives rise to many weighty considerations. Be sure to marry a woman with good common sense, was the advice given me by my mentor, and I just hand it down to you. Common sense is the most uncommon and most valuable quality in men or women. But before you have occasion to provide yourself with a helpmate, there comes the subject upon which I am to address you, wealth. Not wealth in millions, but simply revenue sufficient for modest, independent living. This opens up the entire subject of wealth in a greater or less degree. Now, what is wealth? How is it created and distributed? There are not far from us immense beds of coal which have lain for millions of years useless and therefore valueless. Through some experiment, or perhaps accident, it was discovered that black stone would burn and give forth heat. Men sank shafts, erected machinery, mined and brought forth coal, and sold it to the community. It displaced the use of wood as fuel, say at one half the cost. Immediately, every bed of coal became valuable because useful or capable of being made so. And here a new article worth hundreds, yes, thousands of millions was added to the wealth of the community. A Scotch mechanic one day, as the story goes, gazing into the fire upon which water was boiling in a kettle, saw the steam raise the lid, as hundreds of thousands had seen before him, but none saw in that sight what he did, the steam engine, which does the work of the world at a cost so infinitely trifling compared with what the plants known before involved, that the wealth of the world has been increased one dares not estimate how much. The saving that the community makes is the root of wealth in any branch of material development. Now, a young man's labor or service to the community creates wealth just in proportion as his service is useful to the community, as it either saves or improves upon existing methods. Commodore Vanderbilt saw, I think, 13 different short railway lines between New York and Buffalo, involving 13 different managements and a disjointed and tedious service. Albany, Schenectady, Utica, Syracuse, Auburn, Rochester, etc., were heads of some of these companies. He consolidated them all, making one direct line over which your Empire State Express flies 51 miles an hour, the fastest time in the world, and 100 passengers patronize the lines where one did in olden days. He rendered the community a special service which, being followed by others, reduces the cost of bringing food from the prairies of the West to your doors to a trifling sum per ton. He produced and is every day producing untold wealth to the community by so doing, and the profit he reaped for himself was but a drop in the bucket compared with that which he showered upon the state and the nation. Now, in the olden days, Before steam, electricity, or any other of the modern inventions, which unitedly have changed the whole aspect of the world, everything was done upon a small scale. There was no room for great ideas to operate upon a large scale, and thus to produce great wealth to the inventor, discoverer, originator, or executive. New inventions gave this opportunity, and many large fortunes were made by individuals. But in our day, we are rapidly passing, if we have not already passed, this stage of development, and few large fortunes can now be made in any part of the world except from one cause, the rise in the value of real estate. Manufacturing, transportation, both upon the land and upon the sea, banking, insurance, have all passed into the hands of corporations composed of hundreds and in many cases thousands of shareholders. The New York Central Railroad is owned by more than 10,000 shareholders. The Pennsylvania Railroad is owned by more people than the vast army which it employs, and nearly one-fourth of the number are the estates of women and children. It is so with the great manufacturing companies, so with the great steamship lines. It is so, as you know, with banks, insurance companies, and indeed with all branches of business. It is a great mistake for young men to say to themselves, "Oh, we cannot enter into business." If any of you have saved as much as $50 or $100, I do not know any branch of business into which you cannot plunge at once. You can get your certificate of stock and attend the meeting of stockholders, make your speeches and suggestions, quarrel with the president and instruct the management of the affairs of the company, and have all the rights and influence of an owner. You can buy shares in anything, from newspapers to tenement houses. But capital is so poorly paid in these days that I advise you to exercise much circumspection before you invest. As I have said to working men and to ministers, college professors, artists, musicians, and physicians, and all the professional classes, do not invest in any business concerns whatever. The risks of business are not for such as you. Buy a home for yourself first, and if you have any surplus, buy another lot or another house, or take a mortgage upon one or upon a railway, and let it be a first mortgage, and be satisfied with moderate interest. Do you know that out of every 100 that attempt business upon their own account, statistics are said to show that 95 sooner or later fail? I know that from my own experience. I can quote the lines of Hudibras and tell you, as far as one manufacturing branch is concerned, that what he found to be true is still true to an eminent degree today. Ay me, what perils do environ the man that meddles with cold iron? The shareholders of iron and steel concerns today can certify that this is so, whether the iron or steel be hot or cold, and such is also the case in other branches of business. The principal complaint against our industrial conditions of today is that they cause great wealth to flow into the hands of the few. Well, of the very few indeed is this true. It was formerly so, as I have explained, immediately after the new inventions had changed the conditions of the world. Today it is not true. Wealth is being more and more distributed among the many. The amount of the combined profits of labor and capital which goes into labor was never so great as today, the amount going to capital never so small. While the earnings of capital have fallen more than one half, in many cases have been entirely obliterated, statistics prove that the earnings of labor were never so high as they were previous to the recent unprecedented depression in business. while the cost of living, the necessaries of life, have fallen in some cases nearly one half. Great Britain has an income tax, and our country is to be subject to this imposition for a time. The British returns show that during the 11 years from 1876 to 1887, the number of men receiving from $750 to $2,500 per year increased more than 21%, while the number receiving from $5,000 to $25,000 actually decreased 2.5%. You may be sure, gentlemen, that the question of the distribution of wealth is settling itself rapidly under present conditions and settling itself in the right direction. The few rich are getting poorer, and the toiling masses are getting richer. Nevertheless, a few exceptional men may yet make fortunes, but these will be more moderate than in the past. This may not be quite as fortunate for the masses of the people as is now believed, because great accumulations of wealth in the hands of one enterprising man who still toils on are sometimes most productive of all the forms of wealth. Take the richest man the world ever saw, who died in New York some years ago. What was found in his case? That, with the exception of a small percentage used for daily expenses, his entire fortune and all its surplus earnings were invested in enterprises which developed the railway system of our country, which gives to the people the cheapest transportation known. Whether the millionaire wishes it or not, he cannot evade the law which, under present conditions, compels him to use his millions for the good of the people. All that he gets during the few years of his life is that he may live in a finer house, surround himself with finer furniture and works of art which may be added. He could even have a grander library, more of the gods around him, but as far as I have known millionaires, the library is the least used part of what he would probably consider furniture in all his mansion. He can eat richer food and drink richer wines, which only hurt him. But truly, the modern millionaire is generally a man of very simple tastes and even miserly habits. He spends little upon himself, and is the toiling bee laying up the honey in the industrial hive, which all the inmates of that hive, the community in general, will certainly enjoy. Here is the true description of the millionaire, as given by Mr. Carter in his remarkable speech before the Bering Sea Tribunal at Paris. Quote, "Those who are most successful in the acquisition of property, and who acquire it to such an enormous extent, are the very men who are able to control it, to invest it, and to handle it in the way most useful to society. It is because they have those qualities that they are able to engross it to so large an extent. They really own, in any just sense of the word, only what they consume. The rest is all held for the benefit of the public. They are the custodians of it. They invest it. They see that it is put into this employment, that employment, another employment. All labor is employed by it, and employed in the best manner, and it is thus made the most productive. These men who acquire these hundreds of millions are really groaning under a servitude to the rest of society, for that is practically their condition, and society really endures it because it is best for them that it should be so." End quote. Here is another estimate by a no less remarkable man. Your friend Mr. Dana justly said at Cornell, quote, "That is one class of men that I refer to, the thinkers, the men of science, the inventors, and the other class is that of those whom God has endowed with a genius for saving, for getting rich, for bringing wealth together, for accumulating and concentrating money, men against whom it is now fashionable to declaim, and against whom legislation is sometimes directed. And yet is there any benefactor of humanity who is to be envied in his achievements and in the memory and the monuments he has left behind him more than Ezra Cornell? Or, to take another example that is here before our eyes, more than Henry W. Sage? These are men who knew how to get rich because they had been endowed with that faculty, and when they got rich, they knew how to give it for great public enterprises, for uses that will remain living, immortal as long as man remains upon the earth. The men of genius and the men of money, those who prepare new agencies of life, and those who accumulate and save the money for great enterprises and great public works, these are the leaders of the world as the 20th century is opening upon us." End quote. The bees of a hive do not destroy the honey-making bees, but the drones. It will be a great mistake for the community to shoot the millionaires, for they are the bees that make the most honey and contribute most to the hive even after they have gorged themselves full. It is a remarkable fact that any country is prosperous and comfortable in proportion to the number of its millionaires. Take Russia, with its population little better than serfs, and living at the point of starvation upon the meanest fare, such fare as none of our people could or would eat, and you find comparatively few millionaires, excepting the emperor and a few nobles who own the land. It is the same to a great extent in Germany, though in recent years industrial development has produced a few pound sterling millionaires. In Berlin in 1902, three had more than 6 millions, and in Prussia, 6 persons had an income of 1 million. In France, where the people are better off than in Germany, you can count but few millionaires. In the old home of our race in Britain, which is the richest country in the world save one, our own, there are more millionaires in pounds sterling, which may be considered the European standard, than in the whole of the rest of Europe, and its people are better off than in any other. You come to our own land, we probably have more millionaires and multimillionaires, both in pounds and dollars, than all the rest of the world put together, although we have not one to every 10 that is reputed so. I have seen a list of supposed millionaires prepared by a well-known lawyer of Brooklyn, which made me laugh as it did many others. I saw men rated there as millionaires who could not pay their debts. Some should have had the cipher cut from their reputed millions. Some time ago I sat next Mr. Evarts at dinner, and the conversation touched upon the idea that men should distribute their wealth during their lives for the public good. One gentleman said that was correct, giving many reasons, one of which was that, of course, they could not take it with them at death. "Well," said Mr. Evarts, "I do not know about that. My experience as a New York lawyer is that somehow or other they do succeed in taking at least 4/5 of it. Their reputed wealth was never found at death." Whatever the ideal conditions may develop, it seems to me Mr. Carter and Mr. Dana are right. Under present conditions, the millionaire who toils on is the cheapest article the community secures at the price it pays for him, namely his shelter, clothing, and food. The inventions of today lead to concentrating industrial and commercial affairs into huge concerns. You cannot work the Bessemer process successfully without employing thousands of men upon one spot. You could not make the armor for ships without first expending $7 millions, as the Bethlehem Company has spent. You cannot make a yard of cotton goods in competition with the world without having an immense factory and thousands of men and women aiding in the process. The great electric establishment here in your town succeeds because it has spent millions and is prepared to do its work upon a great scale. Under such conditions, it is impossible but that wealth will flow into the hands of a few men in prosperous times beyond their needs. But out of 50 great fortunes which Mr. Blaine had a list made of, he found only one man who was reputed to have made a large fortune in manufacturing. Fortunes are most often made from real estate. Next follow transportation, banking. The whole manufacturing world furnished but one millionaire. But assuming that surplus wealth flows into the hands of a few men, what is their duty? How is the struggle for dollars to be lifted from the sordid atmosphere surrounding business and made a noble career? Now, wealth has hitherto been distributed in three ways. The first and chief one is by willing it at death to the family. Now, beyond bequeathing to those dependent upon one the revenue needful for modest and independent living, is such a use of wealth either right or wise? I ask you to think over the result. As a rule, of millions given over to young men and women and sons and daughters of the millionaire, you will find that, as a rule, it is not good for the daughters, and this is seen in the character and conduct of the men who marry them. As for the sons, you have their conditions as described in the extract which I read you from the Sun. Nothing is truer than this, that, as a rule, the almighty dollar bequeathed to sons or daughters by millions proved an almighty curse. It is not the good of the child which the millionaire parent considers when he makes these bequests. It is his own vanity. It is not affection for the child, it is self-glorification for the parent, which is at the root of this injurious disposition of wealth. There is only one thing to be said for this mode. It furnishes one of the most efficacious means of rapid distribution of wealth ever known. There is a second use of wealth, less common than the first, which is not so injurious to the community, but which should bring no credit to the testator. Money is left by millionaires to public institutions when they must relax their grasp upon it. There is no grace, and can be no blessing, in giving what cannot be withheld. It is no gift because it is not cheerfully given, but only granted at the stern summons of death. The miscarriage of these bequests, the litigation connected with them, and the manner in which they are frittered away seem to prove that the fates do not regard them with a kindly eye. We are never without a lesson that the only mode of producing lasting good by giving large sums of money is for the millionaire to give as close attention to its distribution during his life as he did to its acquisition. We have today the noted case of 5 or 6 millions of dollars left by a great lawyer to found a public library in New York, an institution needed so greatly that the failure of this bequest is a misfortune. It is years since he died. The will is pronounced invalid through a flaw, although there is no doubt of the intention of the donor. It is sad commentary upon the folly of men holding the millions, which they cannot use until they are unable to put them to the end they desire. Peter Cooper, Pratt of Baltimore, and Pratt of Brooklyn, and others are the type of men who should be taken by you as your model. They distributed their surplus during life. The third use, and the only noble use of surplus wealth, is this. that it be regarded as a sacred trust to be administered by its possessor, into whose hands it flows for the highest good of the people. Man does not live by bread alone, and 5 or 10 cents a day more revenue scattered over thousands would produce little or no good. Accumulated into a great fund and expended as Mr. Cooper expended it for the Cooper Institute, it establishes something that will last for generations. It will educate the brain, the spiritual part of man. It furnishes a ladder upon which the aspiring poor may climb. And there is no use whatever, gentlemen, trying to help people who do not help themselves. You cannot push anyone up a ladder unless he be willing to climb a little himself. When you stop boosting, he falls to his injury. Therefore, I have often said, and I now repeat, that the day is coming, and already we see its dawn, in which the man who dies possessed of millions of available wealth, which was free and in his hands ready to be distributed, will die disgraced. Of course, I do not mean that the man in business may not be stricken down with his capital in the business, which cannot be withdrawn, for capital is the tool with which he works his wonders and produces more wealth. I refer to the man who dies possessed of millions of securities, which are held simply for the interest they produce, that he may add to his hoard of miserable dollars. By administering surplus wealth during life, great wealth may become a blessing to the community, and the occupation of the businessman accumulating wealth may be elevated so as to rank even with the physician, one of the highest of our professions, because he too, in a sense, will be a physician, looking after and trying not to cure, but to prevent the ills of humanity. To those of you who are compelled or who desire to follow a business life and to accumulate wealth, I commend this idea. The epitaph which every rich man should wish himself justly entitled to is that seen upon the monument to Pitt. He lived without ostentation, and he died poor. Such is the man whom the future is to honor, while he who dies in old age, retired from business, possessed of millions of available wealth, is to die unwept, unhonored, and unsung. I may justly divide young men into 4 classes. First, those who must work for a living, and set before them as their aim the acquisition of a modest competence, of course, with a modest but picturesque cottage in the country, and one as a companion who maketh sunshine in a shady place, and is the gold angel of his life. The motto of this class number 1 might be given as, quote, "Give me neither poverty nor riches, from the anxieties of poverty as from the responsibilities of wealth. Good Lord, deliver us." End quote. Class number 2, comprising those among you are who determined to acquire wealth, whose aim in life is to belong to that much talked of and grandly abused class, the millionaires, those who start to labor for the greatest good of the greatest number, but the greatest number always number 1. The motto of this class being short and to the point, quote, "Put money in thy purse." End quote. Now, the third class comes along. The God they worship is neither wealth nor happiness. They are inflamed with noble ambition. The desire of fame is the controlling element of their lives. Now, while this is not so ignoble as the desire for material wealth, it must be said that it betrays more vanity. The shrine of fame has many worshippers. The element of vanity is seen in its fiercest phase among those who come before the public. It is well known, for instance, that musicians, actors, and even painters, all the artistic class, are peculiarly prone to excessive personal vanity. This has often been wondered at, but the reason probably is that the musician and the actor and even the painter may be transcendent in his special line without being even highly educated, without having an all-around brain. Some peculiarities, some one element in his character may give him prominence or fame, so that his love of art or of use through art is entirely drowned by a narrow, selfish, personal vanity. But we find this liability in a lesser degree all through the professions. The politician, the lawyer, and with reverence be it spoken, sometimes the minister. Less, I think, in the physician than in any of the professions, probably because he, more than in any other profession, is called to deal with the sad realities of life face to face. He of all men sees the vanity of vanities. An illustration of this class is well drawn in Hotspur's address. By heavens, methinks it were an easy leap to pluck bright honor from the pale-faced moon, or dive into the bottom of the deep, where phantom line could never touch the ground, and pluck up drowned honor by the locks. So he that doth redeem her thence might wear without rival all her dignities. Mark, young gentleman, he cares not for use, he cares not for state, he cares only for himself, and as a vain peacock struts across the stage. Now, gentlemen, it does not seem to me that the love of wealth is the controlling desire of so many as the love of fame, and this is matter for sincere congratulation, and proves that under the irresistible laws of evolution, the race is slowly moving onward and upward. Take the whole range of the artistic world, which gives sweetness and light to life, which refines and adorns, and surely the great composer, painter, pianist, lawyer, judge, statesman, all those in public life, care less for millions than for professional reputation in their respective fields of labor. What cared Washington, Franklin, Lincoln, or Grant and Sherman for wealth? Nothing. What cared Harrison or Cleveland? Two poor men, not unworthy successors. What care the judges of our Supreme Court or even the leading counsel that plead before them? The great preachers, physicians, great teachers are not concerned about the acquisition of wealth. The treasure they seek is in the reputation acquired through their service to others, and this is certainly a great step from the millionaire class who struggle to old age and through old age to the verge of the grave with no ambition, apparently except to add to their pile of miserable dollars. But there is a fourth class, higher than all the preceding, who worship neither at the shrine of wealth nor fame, but at the noblest of all shrines, the shrine of service, service to the race. Self-abnegation is its watchword. Members of this inner and higher circle seek not popular applause, are concerned not with being popular, but with being right. They say with Confucius, quote, "It concerneth me not that I have not high office. What concerns me is to make myself worthy of office." End quote. It is not cast down by poverty, neither unduly elated by prosperity. The man belonging to this class simply seeks to do his duty day by day in such manner as may enable him to honor himself, fearing nothing but his own self-reproach. I have known men and women not prominently before the public, for this class courts not prominence, but who in their lives proved themselves to have reached this ideal stage. Now, I will give you for this class the fitting illustration from the words of a Scotch poet who died altogether too young. I will go forth among men, not mailed in scorn, but in the armor of a pure intent. Great duties are before me, and great songs. And whether crowned or crownless when I fall, it matters not, so as God's work is done. I've learned to prize the quiet lightning deed, not the applauding thunder at its heels, which men call fame. Then, gentlemen, standing upon the threshold of life, you have the good, better, best presented to you, the three stages of development, the natural, spiritual, and celestial, they may fitly be called. One has success in material things of its aim, not without benefit this for the race as a whole, because it lifts the individual from the animal and demands the exercise of many valuable qualities, sobriety, industry, and self-discipline. The second rises still higher. The reward sought for being things more of the spirit, not gross, immaterial, but invisible, and not of the flesh, but of the brain, the spiritual part of man. And this brings into play innumerable virtues which make good and useful men. The third or celestial class stands upon an entirely different footing from the others in this, that selfish considerations are subordinated in the select brotherhood of the best, the service to be done for others being the first consideration. The reward of either wealth or fame is unsought, for these have learned and know full well that virtue is its own and the only exceeding great reward, and this once enjoyed, all other rewards are not worth seeking. And so wealth and even fame are dethroned, and there stands enthroned the highest standard of all, your own approval flowing from a faithful discharge of duty as you see it, fearing no consequences, seeking no reward. It does not matter much what branch of effort your tastes or judgment draw you to. The one great point is that you should be drawn to some one branch. Then perform your whole duty in it and a little more, the little more being vastly important. We have the words of a great poet for it, that the man who does the best he can whilst do more. Maintain your self-respect as the most precious jewel of all, and the only true way to win the respect of others, and then remember what Emerson says, for what he says here is true. Quote, no young man can be cheated out of an honorable career in life unless he cheat himself. End quote. End of section 5. Wealth and its uses.
Section 6 of The Empire of Business by Andrew Carnegie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Michelle Fry, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in August 2020. The Empire of Business, Section 6, Anglo-American Trade Relations. This section contrasts the commercial methods of the two countries, the part the tariff plays in trade, protective tariff in the United States, free trade in Britain, and a comparison of results. Upon the threshold of this great question, we encounter that evergreen subject of discussion, free trade versus protection. There is only one kind of free trade, but there are two kinds of protection. First, the British kind, and then the American variety, very different indeed in theory and in practice. Protection in Britain simply means that the food of the people should be permanently made dearer to the consumer, and consequently that the value of land should be permanently and artificially enhanced. Now, the American idea of protection is that foreshadowed by Mill. It adheres to Adam Smith's great doctrine that the end to be aimed at is the best supply of an article at the lowest price under the free exchange of commodities. Thus, he keeps ever in view the consumer. If we have reason to believe that the resources of a country are such as only need development to furnish a better and cheaper supply of an article than has ever been or could ever be obtained from other lands, we believe with Adam Smith that it is sometimes advisable to pay dearer for that article for a time, if the end be the conquest of a greater market. Adam Smith was not a wild dogmatist upon the subject of free trade. Indeed, he has recorded his opinion that he might as well expect utopia upon earth as the establishment of complete free trade, even in Britain. And where changes were to be made in fiscal laws, he is clear always upon this point, that these must be slowly made and without serious injury to trade as it exists. Here are two examples to illustrate the difference between protection in England and in America. During the War for the Union, the American people were hurt and incensed by hostility shown, not by the British people, but by the British government. They determined to limit the use of British products as much as possible, and especially to be independent in the supply of iron and steel, the sinews of war, since by England's warlike attitude and the building of the Alabama, it was not as certain as, thank the fates, it is now, that war between the two countries could not come. Thus does wrong done nations or people bring retribution, and every foe created is a danger ready to explode. The Alabama gave us 30 years continuous protection and enables us to invade Britain successfully with our steel. The government asked manufacturers how much duty would be required to induce them to enter the new business of making steel. Up to that time, we had made none successfully. 30% duty was asked and obtained. All know the result. Not only is the American supplied with cheaper steel than any nation in the world, Britain not excepted, but it is certain that a large part of the wants of the world is to be supplied by this country. It is beyond all question the country which can best produce steel today. Now, we think the temporary protection given, and which has been reduced to 1/4 its first extent, is here fully vindicated. Take the other case. The best men of every nation must ever labor to advance the material progress of that nation by introducing new manufactures, and it was thought that with proper protection for a time, the Union would grow a full supply of sugar, cheaper than it could be brought from abroad. This experiment, however, resulted in failure. We were mistaken. Therefore, protection was abandoned and sugar made free. In the one case, protection was a success, in the other, a failure. I think that what has taken place in